You're listening to episode 42 of Literacy in Color. Today's guest is Alejandra Ramirez, a bilingual educator, literacy leader, and passionate advocate for multilingual learners. With over a decade of experience teaching in dual language programs, Alejandra brings both lived and professional experience to the table when it comes to bridging structured literacy with bilingual education. She holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in bicultural bilingual studies and is trained in LETRS and the Esperanza dyslexia program. Now serving as an elementary reading coordinator, Alejandra specializes in curriculum development, biliteracy instruction, and teacher support. In this episode, we explore the big question, is the science of reading for multilingual learners? Alejandra helps us unpack how the science of reading applies and adapts to students learning two languages. So from assessment and instruction to equity and access, this is a must-listen for any educators supporting multilingual learners in a structured literacy framework. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am so excited about today's episode because we are joined with Alejandra Ramirez, and she is an expert in the science of reading in terms of multilingual learners. And I think this is a hot topic conversation because a lot of times we'll hear out there the science of reading does not apply to multilingual learners. The science of reading is only for monolinguals. So I truly appreciate all of the work that she has to offer the world, everything that she puts out there, because I think these are the voices that we truly need to hear from the most. So welcome to the show, Alejandra.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this and just share a little bit about the science of reading, but for dual language teachers or parents that are teaching another language at home. So I'm super excited to share.
And what's special about Alejandra is she is also providing a pre-recorded bonus session for the Science of Reading MiniCon conference. She's going to be talking about getting started with Spanish phonics. So maybe we'll get a little bit into Spanish phonics at the end of the episode, but I'd love to get into kind of the whole research aspect with multilingual learners. But before we get into that, can you just briefly introduce yourself and share a little bit about your science of reading journey?
Sure. So I've been teaching and part of bilingual education for, I think, over a decade. I think this may be like year 11, year 12. I have my master's degree in bilingual bicultural studies. I've actually been trained in letters, which was so eye-opening. If you have the opportunity to get trained in letters, definitely do that. I'm also trained in the Esperanza dyslexia program, and that's kind of where I started my whole journey with the science of reading before it was as big as it is now. My current role is elementary reading coordinator. So I oversee pre-K to fifth grade literacy instruction for my district. So that includes four elementaries and one early childhood campus. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done here because we're really implementing just high quality literacy instruction. I feel like not everybody has moved towards implementing the science of reading, and I can definitely say that our teachers here are embracing it and doing what's best for our students. But my passion is definitely dyslexia awareness, but for bilingual students, multilingual students. I started researching literacy a lot more when my son was diagnosed with dyslexia, and that was in second grade, and I was his teacher. So I was following balanced literacy because that's what our framework was, but I had gotten trained in structured literacy through Esperanza. So I noticed that he was just way behind everybody else. He was not reading, he was not making any progress with any of the instruction that I was providing. So I kind of took my teacher hat off and had to put my parent hat on, and I did ask for assessing for dyslexia, and he received dyslexia intervention in Spanish. So he's bilingual and got his intervention in Spanish, and it was beautiful. He learned to read by the end of the year. So this was probably September, October, and he started intervention, and by the end of the year, he was good, solid. That's when I really started taking off more in what is dyslexia? How do I best support my child? How do I best support students that come to my class that have dyslexia and are learning a different language? And that's when I noticed that there's hardly anything out there. So there's a huge gap between what is available for our students that are learning English and have dyslexia compared to what our bilingual, dual language, multilingual learners have. So there's only one program that is essentially used in the United States. It's called Esperanza. Great program, but I feel that we could definitely provide more for our students. So that's kind of where I started everything. And now here I am doing a lot more with literacy in Spanish.
I love it. And I really appreciate hearing your story about being a mom and a teacher going through it. And I think a lot of things that many teachers who work with either ELL students or maybe students who are in dual language or bilingual programs, they tend to fall through the cracks even more when it comes to reading difficulties, because even in places where English is the primary language, there's this wait and see approach, right? But then for
Mhm.
students who are learning another language, it's like, oh, well, maybe the other language is kind of impacting their reading development and those kinds of things. But
Right.
the urgency is there, whether you're bilingual
Absolutely.
or bilingual or multilingual. And I said it before, but I've heard so many arguments that the science of reading is not for multilingual learners. And the school I used to work with, we had a dual language program. And so when that came to be, I had to coach both the regular
Mhm.
track, I guess, teachers and then our dual language teachers. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not an expert in dual language. So here I am. I'm trying to like find books. I'm trying to find webinars. I'm trying to find these experts who know about dual language and then know about the science of reading, because I'm hearing all these people say, oh, even though the science of reading has been done in multiple languages, multiple
Mhm.
studies, always studying monolinguals. So it would be French kids learning French and Chinese kids learning Chinese. But that's not necessarily the case, right? So what
Right.
does the science of reading apply to multilinguals?
Absolutely. So I absolutely believe that the science of reading applies to multilingual learners. Now, we do want to make sure that we have equitable research and evidence-based research to provide, and it's always evolving, right? However, I know that Stanislas Dehaene did a lot of work in this area, and he does have this book that I read called Aprender a Leer, and he really breaks it down, and it's free on if you search it up. So he really breaks it down how the brain learns how to read. And you can see that across many different languages. The one thing that I do want to emphasize is that when you are teaching multilingual learners, you have to make those connections between languages. And as the teacher, parent, you have to know the ins and outs of the language you are teaching. and know where to make those connections. What is a positive transfer? What's a negative transfer? Because as multilingual, bilingual people, we don't have separate brains, one brain in English and one brain in Spanish. We have it all merged together. And sometimes even I'm guilty of that. Sometimes my words don't come in English and I have to compensate with Spanish and it takes me a little while. But making connections between languages is an addition that we can add to the research of science of reading, is how exactly we can teach our students in the most systematic way to help get them reading. The code is the code. They need to understand the code.
Yeah. So it's like all brains learn how to read the same way, but
Yes.
there might be an added layer for the
Mhm.
bilingual brain. And you were talking about making those connections. I know in the past we were working with dual language consultants. You always talked about the bridging process. When you're changing
Yes.
from one language to the next, you always have to make room for the bridging and the translanguaging. So, what's unique maybe about the bilingual brain that influences how we should approach reading instruction?
I think the bilingual brain just operates, just the languages are so interconnected that we don't want to take away from that, not use it. You have to use how a student understands language to get them to comprehend or to read or to decode. And I'll kind of give you some examples here in a little bit about what it would look like or what it would look like in a classroom. It's not necessarily a deficit, but more of a way to be aware of how language is processed through our brain and that it's not just a separate part of learning how to read. It all connects together. And also to not confuse that learning a language is a process that comes along with just being present or just having that interaction. You're going to pick up language with a little bit of support here and there, but learning how to read is very different and you're having to really teach a code and you have to teach that in any language.
I think about too, I mean, I grew up bilingual as well in Polish,
Hmm.
and Polish is really hard. I mean, people want to say English is hard. Polish is really hard. There's like C, Z, 10,000 consonants in a row making these And for me, if my mom would help me write letters to my grandparents when I was little. And I remember doing kind of like phonemic awareness in Polish. I'm like trying to segment these words and like, Mommy, help me. How do we spell this sound in Polish? And it's true, like that's how we're processing. We have to
Hmm.
match the sounds to the symbols and the symbols to the sounds, no matter the language is transparent or really sophisticated orthography. We have to make those kinds of connections. So, when we're thinking about different science of reading models, the simple view of reading,
Hmm.
and maybe even Scarborough's reading rope, all those things that we see out there that put the science of reading into ways that we can understand how the brain is
Hmm.
operating, how would you apply that to a multilingual learner? Are there any things that you would add to those models, or anything maybe researchers have added to those models to make sense of the multilingual brain?
Yes, so a while back, I had kind of taken that simple view of reading and did decoding times comprehension equals language comprehension. I was just workshopping this by myself. We have to account for something else, and that's cross-linguistic or metalinguistic awareness. So I kind of put it in like a parentheses and added that, and I shared it out and I got negative feedback, positive feedback. It's just like anything, but you just see it in a different way. We're not saying you can't do this without this. You have to put it all together and include it in what the simple view of reading is. So it's all about those language connections, oral language, oracy, building up that awareness of language. I believe that's one thing I would absolutely add is how are you making your instruction more accessible in language or through language?
I love that. And so, for someone who just needs the terminology a little bit more explicit, can you explain more by what you mean with cross linguistic connections?
Sure. So cross-linguistic connections is almost like a bridge. your bridging that you were saying, you think of a bridge and you have English on one side and Spanish on the other side, or a chain, and you kind of link them both together and see what fits together, or you could even use a puzzle. So, for example, the word in Spanish is animal, but in English it's animal. They have the same spelling, same meaning, it's just pronounced a little bit differently. So those are cognates. And we want to make sure that we are taking into consideration cognates to help with comprehension or reinforcing phonics and decoding. If we use those type of connections, it's going to help the student remember those skills a lot more. You have to have them use it. If they don't use it, they can't make a connection with it, it's not going to stick.
That's really helpful. We always call those our chocolate words.
Yes, they are chocolate words for sure. I like
Chocolate
that.
and chocolate, they're spelled the same, sound different. You have your
Yep,
cognates.
still the
It's such
same thing.
Yeah, I'm always on my morphology soapbox. And when I think about too, we could talk about multilingual learners in general, but if
Mhm.
you take into consideration the United States, majority of your multilingual learners are Hispanic from Spanish speaking countries. And then when we take a look at language origin and we see like 60% of English is derived from Latin, well,
Yes.
Spanish is a Latin language. We can be super explicit about like some of the connections in words and
Mhm,
even for your general words, like we use words about school, teacher. Well, in Spanish, it's profesora, right? And it's like,
mhm.
oh, that's a professor. It's almost like this is a more academic way to speak.
It is.
So, how can we bring some of that language into our English too to make those
Mhm.
connections? And I think too, being explicit about language, I think is so important.
It is important how you were talking about morphology. So, like, let's say the word transition. So you have the ending transition. Well, in Spanish, it's transición. So any word that kind of ends with that shun sound is usually sion in Spanish. So you can make connections there as well. And it'll help with spelling. It'll help with, let's say, oh, well, I know it in Spanish, and I know that if this word ends this way, it's going to be written this way in English. So transition. So I'm going to spell it. So that is essentially metalinguistic awareness. You're using what you know about language to process and be able to deliver or give an output.
And I think it goes back to thinking about our students who are speaking more language. Like, this is an asset. This is something that's really special about their linguistic skills. They're bringing more
Mhm,
to the table. And I think oftentimes teachers who don't have experience teaching either L students or multilingual learners, they feel this sense of discouragement or fear. Like, I don't know their language. I don't know how to help them. I don't know what if you have a student who's port of entry and speaks like not a lick of English? Like, I don't know how to support
yeah.
them, but you don't necessarily have to speak their language. You have to kind of understand the structure of their language and how their
Mhm,
language is operating in the system and think about like, they're not a blank slate bringing nothing to the table. They have language skills. And so it's kind of tapping into
absolutely.
the skills that they already have.
Absolutely. Like they are not a blank slate at all. They know something is just something in a language we don't understand. And if you don't speak the language that maybe they know, then we might need to become more of an actor, an actress, or use visuals. So language is not just print or vocal. You want to use signals, you want to use visuals and make those connections that way as well. So definitely not knowing the language is not something to hold a teacher or anyone back. You could adapt if you wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. So, for people who are maybe more interested in learning about multilingual learners and the science of reading and how those ideas mesh together, are there any researchers or maybe books that you'd recommend?
Yes. So earlier I said Stanislas Dehaene. He has several books out there that are really great reads, but there's also Claude Goldenberg. He has taught in dual language settings, and he's bilingual himself. He's done a lot of work through that. My favorite book is the one by Elsa Cardenas Hagen. She started off as a speech language pathologist, I believe, and then created Esperanza. And it's an orange book, and I think it's called Literacy for Early or ELs. It's a great book. I also like Dr. Antonio Fierro. If you've taken letters, you've seen him in some of the videos with Luisa Motes. And I think he now is developing a Spanish sound wall. So I'm not sure when that's coming. And then also, I really like Dr. Jose Medina. He does a great job with bridging and cross-linguistic connections and knowing how to apply those anchor charts in class to make the connections between Spanish and English. So I think those are my main people that I really go to and read through as much as possible.
I love those recommendations. I actually got to meet Elsa Cardenas Hagen at the Reading League. She signed my book. And we
Oh,
were talking about, we're like, everybody needs the orange book, the orange one.
yes. It's an orange book, great book. Mine's all tabbed and noted and has all kinds of things, but it's a great book. And there's several resources online that are free, like a mini book study that you can watch and go through if anybody wanted to.
I love it. We could link that all in the show notes. So I'd love to shift gears, shift from research maybe into practice a little bit, and maybe we could
Hmm.
talk about some of the nuances in phonics instruction for multilingual learners. So, how does English phonics differ from Spanish phonics?
Well, the main one is probably the pacing and the scope and sequence of teaching letters and sounds. That the way in Spanish, the way we teach, since it's a more transparent language, we start off with the vowels. The vowels are our building blocks for all words. So we definitely start off there, really get our students to understand the vowels. And the vowels are consistent. So the sound is the sound. It's not going to change because it's next to a consonant. The other thing that I would say is that sometimes in Spanish, students will begin to blend and decode a little bit quicker, more so because of the transparency of the language, not that it's easier. It's just the language is transparent. So I know I've heard several times, well, students will learn faster in Spanish because it's easier. It's not easy for everybody. We still have students that are going to struggle with processing how to read in any language. The other thing that is probably important to do between English and Spanish is just really hone in on checking those similarities and differences between the languages and not thinking that you need to teach everything all over again in English and then having to go back and teach it all over again in Spanish. Really use your time wisely and check for the transfers between one language versus the other. So, for example, when I taught kindergarten, I taught literacy in Spanish, and I did have a brief moment where we did instruction in English. So when I taught my English block, I did not go back and reteach everything that they've learned in Spanish. The B or the D or the F, those are all the same sounds in English. I would only reteach or teach the sounds that did not transfer from Spanish to English. So using your time wisely. And I don't know if there is a program that does that out there. This is where your knowledge of language comes in your planning time. And I think those are the main ones. The way you would teach English phonics, where you make the connection between reading and writing, is still as important to do it in Spanish. When I did my Spanish phonics instruction, we were already doing the dictados, our dictations, and connecting our reading to what we're learning. So when the science of reading started coming out, I said, dual language has been doing this. This is not new.
Yeah, I appreciate your mention of not repeating the information because I think that's such a helpful tip. I know even the school I used to work at, when we were trying to iron out our dual language program from the start, even we were
Hmm.
trying to figure out, well, what's it look? Are we going to teach phonics in English and then phonics in Spanish in a second time of the day? And yes, we did have that, but it's like the scopes had to be adjusted, right? And
Hmm.
I remember reading, it was like, okay, so in English we have 44 phonemes. Well, 15 of those are the same in Spanish.
Exact same.
Yeah. So it's not about teaching it twice. It's maybe making it some kind of awareness of it's that bridging
Hmm.
again, that, these
Yes.
sounds are the same, these symbols are the same. Maybe there's even certain differences. Like I'm even thinking, you mentioned the sound for D, and in Spanish, like your tongue's a little bit
Soft.
different. It's, yeah,
Yes.
right?
It's a little softer. It's not as hard. It's definitely your tongue is behind your teeth a little bit more. So articulation is very important when you're teaching phonics instruction. You may think it's the same. There's a very small difference there between the two.
Yeah, just how the sound is coming out of your mouth.
Hmm.
So I think those kinds
Absolutely.
of things are important and worth instructional time to talk about accenting and
Oh,
that.
yeah.
I'm curious though. So we had a program called Estrellita. I'm
Yes.
curious if you are of the ma me me ma mu philosophy
Hmm.
or not.
Well, that's
Because I know that's a
controversial.
debate too with Spanish phonics. That's
Yes.
the traditional way.
Yes, Mame Mi Momu is very traditional. I taught with Estrellita, so ma, pa, sa, la. So all the consonants with one vowel. And I preferred teaching one vowel and all the consonants. Mainly because I was able to make more words and sentences and phrases that made sense. They had a subject, they had a predicate. It was easier for me to create phrases because this was a time that I had to create almost everything when I was teaching phonics. There wasn't really much out there, and as much as I do like Estrellita, it's not as easy as picking it up and following it because it's not scripted the way you would see another English phonics program. You do have to add your phonological awareness, but I prefer teaching it the way Estrellita had it than their scope and sequence because it gave me more opportunities to create more words and more phrases with it to practice writing and reading.
That makes sense.
And I don't think either way is wrong. My preference was always not mame mi momo, but the other way.
Yeah, yeah. And it just goes to show we talk about in English, there's no set phonics scope and sequence. So there's different
Mhm.
ways to approach, you're teaching the code, it's just a different approach.
Yes.
So going back to that reading brain, when you're teaching a multilingual learner a new code, so we want to make the transfer with languages, the things that are the same. That's your cross-linguistic connections, right? What else maybe do we have to take into consideration when we're teaching two things at the same time?
Definitely the pacing. Another thing is, and this is kind of small, but when you are teaching grapheme phoneme mapping or using Elkanin boxes, sometimes in Spanish it's easy to say, well, the whole syllable is going to go in one box. If you say chocolate, chocolate, that's four syllables. And then maybe you teach cho goes in one, go, and so on. But it can get confusing when you go into maybe your English language development time and when you're teaching in English the same strategy using Elkanin boxes, it can be hard for students to get out of saying, oh, well, I'm going to put the syllables in here. So if they say chocolate, they're not going to put the phonemes in each one. And this is just from experience and what I've seen and what I've gone through. So what I would suggest is one box is one phoneme. So if it's ch, then that's one phoneme. So that way it doesn't cause any confusion to our students. And it'll help with teachers just transfer that skill or strategy over.
That's really helpful, and I think sometimes we just have to be explicit, like, here we're mapping syllables, here we're mapping sounds, and
Hmm.
that's explicit, so you're doing a different type of task, and to know that in
Yes.
Spanish, it is helpful to really do phonological awareness. In English, it might be more helpful phoneme awareness, and that's the difference too.
Yes, and phonological
Yeah.
awareness does develop through reading and writing in Spanish because it's so transparent. So you can develop it that way as well.
And you think about too, and I'm going back to layers of language and just how our whole spelling system's developed. In English and phonics, a lot of those one syllable words, those are your Anglo-Saxon words, girl, duck, dress. Those are Anglo-Saxon. And your words in Spanish, you're getting into multisyllabic words really early. And so many
Absolutely.
words are two syllables, three syllables, four syllables, five
Hmm.
syllables. So it's just a different type of structure.
For sure. It's definitely way more syllabic. We just teach syllables all the time. When I was teaching, it was constant. You need to separate the language. When it's English time, it's English time. And when it's Spanish time, it's Spanish time. I think that's changed. We want to be intentional with using the languages rather than separating them to make sure that they're using all their language skills and not isolating them.
I think about even myself communicating with aunts and uncles. I try to speak in Polish and all of a sudden I don't know a word, so I slip an English word in there.
Hmm.
And if they were to tell
Yes,
me, no, no, you could only speak Polish, like, what's that going to do to me? That's going to shut me down and I'm not going to speak at all because now I don't
exactly.
know what to do. So, like, honoring all of the skills that you're bringing to the table.
It shouldn't be a punishment that you may forget something, but more so just guide.
That's, I think, the beauty in it. I think making sure I see bilingual dual language teachers really promoting oracy and just the importance of having opportunities to speak and making sure they're constantly talking and
Yes.
practicing language. I think that's just something that we really have to advocate for.
Absolutely. And it's not just in a dual language or bilingual setting. I coach our teachers to make sure that they are using language, practicing what they're going to write. It's across the board. That's actually one of our goals this coming year is ensuring that we're all talking before we respond or getting that practice in to use vocabulary words, but absolutely oracy. One of my favorite things is interactive word walls. I would use them in science and social studies. So I'm using a lot of realia and visuals, pictures, sometimes things that or objects that students would bring in from home. And we would label it, and we would also, depending on the science topic, of course, but we would also create sentence stems to use our vocabulary wall, essentially. So this car is a solid because blank. So they're using sentence stems, but also using the wall of vocabulary words to help fill in the gaps. So it's always scaffolded to support our students as much as possible.
I love that. So, what are some practical tips and strategies that educators can implement to effectively support their multilingual learners with phonics instruction in particular?
I would highly suggest teaching phoneme articulations, grabbing out a mirror, showing them how it is articulated with through their mouth. Where is their tongue? Is it an open, closed? I really liked using that to help with students that get confused with B and D. I would always go into, well, let's look at how our sound or articulation looks like. How does it feel? How does it sound? Always using visuals or gestures to reinforce any kind of sound symbol correspondence. I used to make little songs that went with some of our letters. Cognate charts are huge to build vocabulary. Still want to make sure you're tapping out those sounds, how many syllables, how many vowels are in the syllable. Phonological awareness is so important still in Spanish, even though it is a transparent language. Using Elkanon boxes is the best thing. And also color coding. I used to like using purple for the letters or sounds that transfer well between two languages, but then red for Spanish, blue for English. I really liked color coding things. Those are the main ones, but also for teachers or people wanting to know is just read on what some of these phoneme articulations sound like and look like in oral language. Practice, 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 practice.
I love that color coding purple because it's really,
Yes.
you're visualizing the queen. That's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. So, Alejandra, this was so helpful. I loved chatting with you today about supporting multilingual learners and how it does align with the science, and we don't have to listen to the naysayers who say that it's just not the case. For those listening who want to learn more about your work and connect with you further, where can they find you?
So my only thing is Instagram. It's called Stuff About Reading, and I post a couple of things here and there about what you can do at home, how you can teach certain phonics skills, but that is my main outlet is Instagram.
Well, we could link that in the show notes. And if anyone's going to Science of Reading MiniCon, be on the lookout for getting started with Spanish phonics. And Alejandra is a wonderful resource to tap into and message further for those who want some more information about how to support multilingual learners. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure.
Same here. I'm so glad that we got to chat about all this because I can go on and on for days.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.